How's it going, YouTube? So today we're going to be talking about recomping while I train some squats and quads and adductors. So if you've been following me, I've been cutting for the last 5 months and you know that. And if you've been doing something similar, like you've started the cut and you're pretty deep in your cut, you probably felt really good at the start of your cut, assuming you want high intensity, heavy weights and lower volume compared to your bulking phase, right? But if you keep going on mesocycle to mesocycle, then you might get to the point where training starts to feel a bit stagnant, either because you're starting to get a little bit less recovered session to session, and you're questioning if your muscle or training potential is starting to drop off because you're just too lean, and you're starting to feel weak or weaker from the previous week. In simple terms, the fatigue is catching up with the heavy lifting. So a lot of people will just go straight into a full-on bulk, which isn't honestly a horrible idea, but if you want to kind of maintain your leanness and kind of main gain, you could do one initial jump up in your calories and start experimenting with a bit of a recomp. So technically it is still a surplus, but I'd still say more of a recomping phase compared to adding back like 800 to 1,000 calories in bulking phase. So in this session, I'm training squats first, obviously. So for competition, this depth is probably not acceptable. Fully aware of it, just squatting to parallel. And truly, if I wasn't competing in powerlifting, I probably wouldn't squat at all, to be quite honest. Long femurs are not favorable for barbell squatting, but even so, I should be working some dorsiflexion to gain some of that mobility back, which is why later in the session, I'm really focusing on getting that adductor and quads trained alongside with mobilizing my ankles by going really deep on squatting mechanic movements, such as my high bar squats and belt squats, which you'll see later in this video. So in my previous blocks, I was squatting twice a week again, and it's really good for me personally when I compete. I love squatting twice a week because my training volume outside of squatting is diminished to next to nothing. So the hips can tolerate it alongside low volume deadlifts, it can also tolerate it. But when I'm in this off-season phase, it seems like my hips are not as durable. Could be the increase in volume in my deadlifts and trying to push the deadlift more, but I do notice my depth on squat gets a lot worse when I don't really focus on these synergist muscle groups like the quads, adductors, glute medius in isolation-like compound movements like Bulgarian split squats done unilaterally, of course. In general, just doing very deep belt squats for the adductors and quads, pretty good one. But I signed up for this because I still want to compete in powerlifting. I feel like it's super fun to make training challenging with certain restrictions. Obviously, if I was great at squatting, I wouldn't have as much challenges. I'd just be like, yo, squatting's amazing for my quad development and adductors. I could just squat and not do any accessories or any movements. But yeah, not really. So all this has to do definitely with how I'm doing a body recomp as well. When I was a little bit chunkier, I could tolerate a lot more in general. But when I'm close to like 12% body fat, the glute medius, the hip bursitis, those things tend to suffer. So that's something I have to watch out for. And maybe you have something similar. Maybe you have something that's completely unrelated to lower body, but maybe like a shoulder problem, right? And this is why training's so fun, because you have to make your training very much specific to your needs. This is why universally not everyone could run the same program and expect amazing results. Our leverages are just simply different. So don't feel like you're training like a little bitch because you're squatting once a week or squatting once every 10 days. Of course, if you could tolerate it, it would be ideal to have a higher training frequency. But if you can't, what could you do? Now, for those who watched in the very beginning, you're like, why were you timing your workout? That kind of has something to do with the recomp phase of what I'm experimenting with. I'm reintroducing them with very little training intensities, like lighter loads, to kind of build up that training volume with the extra big calories I introduced into my nutrition. Now, what I'm not doing is jacking up all the volume in my training. I'm specifically jacking up the volume with the areas I'm struggling with, particularly the glute medius, the adductors, the quads, as I felt like these muscle groups in particular have taken the biggest hit from potentially me dropping down my training volume in the cut I've done to get ready for my competition last May so that I could make weight for 93 kilos. It's like I purposely chickened my legs out. It's pretty interesting because I do feel like I'm the most jacked I've ever been. Sounds kind of douchey, but it's true. Because my previous bulk, I feel like I'm carrying so much more muscle and lean tissue than I ever have. And it kind of sucks that I'm gonna have to compete at a lighter body weight. I really wish there was a 100 kilo weight class flat, because even then, I don't think I could pass beyond 217 pounds body weight without getting chunky. And so I'm trying to regain a little bit more volume in these areas without overdoing it and making the synergist muscle groups even more detrained from overdoing the training. So the premise is shorter rest times, lighter weights, faster sets, less time spent in the gym. But of course, with my SPD compounds and maybe one leg movement, such as belt squats, I'm going to take my time with these movements. They are still the majority of my training. From a hypertrophy standpoint, I don't think I'm going to get very far with the style training. But again, my goal right now is not hypertrophy because I am competing at 93 kilos probably in like 3 months. So I have very little size to actually gain this area. I just want to make sure my hips are not going to get wrecked from having a bunch of rusty links in the chain, aka my adductors, quads, and glute medius from not addressing them off season. So hopefully this video has taught you kind of like the thinking process I go through when I design my own training splits and splits for my clients, is to kind of identify where you need to improve in your training without thinking so rudimentary and being like, I need a bulk just to gain mass everywhere, or I need a cut because I'm fat everywhere. The deeper you get into training, the expectation has to drop, not to zero, so you still want to make mini goals in your training blocks, but just enough so you can keep making progress. I hope you like this video, like, subscribe, and comment below. Peace.